Okay. Hello all, my name is Amira Armond. I'm with Carry Solutions and CMMCaudit.org. And today I'm interviewing Steve Pratt from SENTAR, an authorized C3 PAO. And we're basically diving deep into precedent. What successfully passed a DoD assessment of CMMC Level 2 or 80171. So hello, Steve. Thank you for joining. I appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So 341, system baselining. Let me share my screen.
Right.
Establish and maintain baseline configurations and inventories of organizational systems. So this is deceptively way more complex than people realize. Once you actually look at the assessment objectives down here, it gets pretty crazy. So I guess the first question is regarding system inventory. Let's go back to when you first were requesting the assessment and you're in scoping. I assume you guys had a scoping call?
We did.
Did they request a system inventory?
I believe they did. It's been a while, but they did request a system inventory as well as our scoping diagram, and they do look. You know, if you've got it on one and not the other, that's an immediate red flag. So any device that is in your diagram should also be listed in your inventory, and vice versa.
So for the system inventory, so in my experience, so both of us as C3 PAOs, we're having clients come to us and say, please assess us. And we, at least my process is I go through a bit of a filtering process to try and make sure that they're actually going to hopefully pass the assessment before we even proceed with the sales, because there's a lot of people that don't know what they don't know. And I think this is going to be an ISO 20001 assessment, and it's a lot more stringent than what they're expecting. Is that your experience as well?
It is, and you know, even some of the companies I've talked to that have a very robust system inventory that includes a lot of things. One of the first questions I ask is, are you familiar with the CMMC scoping guides, and have you identified each device by category from that? And that's you'd be surprised how many people have not heard of that and are going in thinking they're ready to pass and have not categorize their systems. In fact, they're very confused when you look at them. So that along with let me see your SSP are the first two questions I ask to determine if they're ready.
Yeah, that's my experience as well, that a lot of potential assessment clients are kind of flabbergasted when you say, I need to see your full inventory, and is this a CUI asset? Is this a specialized asset? Which is literally written into the scoping guide. It says we have to ask for that information. So, but that is all predicated upon them doing this requirement. Because if they haven't done this, they're probably going to have a hard time coming up with that inventory for scoping purposes.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about D, E, and F, because those are easier, I think, for most people. So how did SENTAR do their system inventory?
So our help desks software will also maintain an inventory list, and we started with that. That allows us to also tie each device to an owner. Um, it will scan our network and find those devices, and then let us. It gets some information from the scan, such as hardware, software, and firmware, and then we're able to go in and modify anything that it incorrectly determined, or add more information as needed, as well as the category of what the device type is.
So
Oh, go ahead.
if I can interrupt you, so I think that's
Sure.
really interesting, that you can modify the list. So you're starting off with a semi-automated system, which is generating and discovering. And then you have the ability to say, if it doesn't realize that you have a switch on the network, you can manually add a switch. Or if it's seen the same device multiple times through different network connections, you can say, hey, that's one thing, that's one firewall, for example. Is that correct?
Right. That is correct. And we did have, not at SENTAR, but a previous company I worked for, the inventory system we used there. It could, if it saw a MAC address on a Wi-Fi connection versus a wired connection, it would add that device as a second device, and that inventory I had the ability to choose to, and say, like you said, right click and say this is the same device, and it was not an issue. But haven't had that problem. It's with Centars, but yeah, that's the level of stuff we do, and then we can add attributes, such as the categorization of as to whether it's um, a what category the device is. Those added attributes are all captured in one description box, so you can see what is manually added versus what is captured by the scan.
Now, this phrase, which shows up in both the baseline configuration as well as the system inventory, hardware, the system inventory includes hardware, software, firmware, and documentation. Did SENTAR try and show an example of each of these in the inventory?
We only showed the hardware, software, and firmware. So documentation, that is a loose term, but I look to that to mean any sort of policy or procedure that might apply to that. Any type of best practices, documents that come with the device, or about the device itself. We did not have to show that in our DIBCAC assessment, though.
That's really good to hear, because it's very hard to provide documentation as part of a system inventory. It's much easier to provide documentation as part of baselines. So I'm glad that they didn't really care that much about it. Now, when the inventory is maintained, how did you show that?
We showed that that new systems are added automatically once they're on the network. It's continuously scanning when a new system is detected. It shows up in our inventory system as we have found this new system. Is it or this new device? Is it part of the system or not? We can look at it, see if part of our security of seeing if a device is somehow connected to our network without our approval. We can detect that. If it is a new device, we can add it to our inventory, and then we also showed that evidence that when a device is retired, that we are removing it from the inventory, and we just keep we can show the system logs, in the software, the help desk software. We can show those system logs showing where devices were removed, and then we also have that a log of that when we remove those.
For your environment, which is a little bit bigger than mine, SENTAR is a much bigger company than mine. Were you trying to be 100% accurate on your system inventory?
Yes. While we are a larger company, our DIBCAC scope was scoped down to our assessors and what we would be doing it using as a C3PAO rather than our entire system for the DIBCAC piece. But yes, we try to keep those accurate. As far as documentation for baselining goes, if there are like systems that are identical, we'll keep a list of what those devices are, but the baseline will say this baseline applies to these specific devices, and then we have a different baseline for each different type of device type,
All right,
versus be it an endpoint, a switch, or a firewall, or et cetera.
I love it. Let's talk about baselines.
Okay.
Okay, so you said you have a baseline for device type. So you don't say, each of my 10 individual laptops has its own baseline. You'll say, here's my baseline for Windows 10 laptops, for example.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not using Windows 11 either, but if we had two versions, we'd have two baselines. So laptops with Windows 10 versus laptops with Windows 11. We do have some on-prem servers. Those we have for those we have a baseline for a server by OS, and then we have a supplemental baseline for, is this an Exchange server, is this a SharePoint server, is this a file server, what type it is. So each one gets the baseline, which is basically the configuration that is identical for each server, and then the supplemental baseline beyond that.
Do you consider automated programs such as scripts, installers, group policy to be part of your baseline?
So if they remain on there, yes. And as another supplemental guide to our baseline is our process for building a system. So if we use a script or an installer during the build of that, and applying that baseline, we will list that in the procedure for how we apply a baseline to a new system. But if it's not remaining on the system, such a script that may be run but doesn't reside on that system, we will leave it off the baseline document, but it is captured in the supplemental procedure for applying a baseline.
Do you do a formal scheduled baseline review or a say generate baselines, or is it entirely version control on your documents and your procedures?
So anytime there's a major version in a firmware or software, we will update the baseline. This is also goes through our change management process. Any change to a baseline goes through our change management process, but we do a formal review annually, and then additionally, if there's a software, we won't do it at the patch level, but if it's at well, let me rephrase that. We will update the baseline based on patch level, but we only bring it before the change board when it's a version change, such as a full upgrade on the software or firmware.
Mm-hmm. What evidence did you show to the assessors that you were establishing baseline configurations?
We showed the baseline documentation, the procedure for applying it, and then they asked to see to look at our devices. They randomly picked, I think 2 or 3 laptops, 2 servers, and a switch to verify that they were configured to the baseline.
So for something like a switch, or say a cloud or a server, where you maybe you only have one of those in your environment, right? You might only have one of that cloud type for your environment. Did you keep a separate document that showed all the toggles and the configurations that were made to that system, or was it more of a change log? How did you track the individual toggles that you only did once?
So for an on-prem, we have an image that we saved of once the switch is configured, we export an image of that so that it could be reapplied, and we make sure it matches the baseline, and then we have a checklist document for when it's configured. So if we're installing from an image, our procedure is to install from the verified baseline image. If it is something like you said with different toggles that are set, we basically have a documented checklist of, once the system, out of the box, these are the things that we change. We check these check boxes, we disable these services, etc. Anything that would allow us to, if we had to replace that device and it was someone else doing it, they could buy the exact same device, apply the same changes we did, and it would be identical once it's put back in the environment. That is about all we have on the cloud stuff, is a checklist for what we did to configure it.
I really like how you mentioned that you basically run an export or a backup of the config for the switch, because that's a wonderful baseline. If you've got every single config command, in a text file, that's great. You can just rebuild the next thing exactly like that. Did you do anything like that for your other devices, like your laptops or your servers, where you ran scripts to gather information from them?
We do for the firewalls, definitely more so on the network devices. We have not done that on. So for our virtual servers that we have on-prem, we do have a snapshot of the baseline, and that's what we start with anytime we add a virtual server. And for our laptops, we're not there yet. It's mostly we do have a gold image that we start with, and then manually apply some things. Some things, because we use Active Directory, we have a group policy. Once it's in Active Directory and added to the correct OUs, the group policy applies it. So we have that. We don't have a specific full image with everything applied to it yet, but that is one of our things that we're looking on for continuous improvement.
All right, now this one's kind of hard.
Okay.
How do you define a baseline configuration? What is a baseline configuration to you?
To me, it is an image of some sort or a checklist. So, and if you can export an image, or if you have an image that you use to do your system, that is definitely in my opinion, the classic definition of a baseline. You can document, and you should also document what is applied to that baseline, how it, so if you had to rebuild it, you could. A checklist is what I will accept that as an assessment. If a team has a checklist that says we buy a new computer and these are the things we do to it to manage it, and then I can verify that they have done that, I will take that as a very rudimentary form of a baseline.
Do you think that baselines only have to do with security, or are they more about the functionality of the overall system?
Both. I don't think it's just security. That it's definitely it's how you can ensure every system is alike, and meets any compliance you have. You may have quality compliance that you have to do. You may have a simple, from an IT management standpoint, being able to know that if you go to a device, this is how it's configured. Um, you know, um, I've worked in companies years ago as an IT person, and you'd have Dell, you'd have HP, you'd have Lenovo, and every one of
5
them's a little
different
bit different.
images.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then you have you'd have to troubleshoot something, and it's working fine on this computer but not this one. Well, what's different? So I think from a management standpoint, ease of management, a baseline is a good thing to have.
When you get new laptops, and maybe this might not be your environment, but as an assessor, when people buy laptops from HP or Dell or whoever, they come with stuff, right?
Mhm.
They come with extra stuff. It's not just Windows on them. Um, would you expect a company to start from scratch, build a gold disk, or would you be comfortable with them using whatever that the vendor added onto the system?
So in my assessments, or really Centar's assessments, we will, in our security assessment report, we will state whether a control is met or not met, but we will also include things that we call opportunities for improvement. And these are things where you're technically meeting the control, but there's a better way to do it, and this is what we would recommend. What we do is we completely reimage. We not only reimage, but we blow away the partitions, extra partitions. We did learn from a previous incident at another company, that if you get malware, sometimes malware will copy itself to the Dell partition, and so you might completely wipe away that system, reimage it, and then the malware comes back. And we found that where that was not happening was one IT guy would blow away all the partitions and start scratch. So that became our new process there. And so I definitely recommend that. But if you have a good, you know, a good checklist to follow, and you've approved that, and you're applying that to a new system, removing the bloatware, removing the things that aren't necessary, closing the ports that aren't necessary, adding what software is needed, starting out with the right version of Windows. Don't be buying the home edition. um, Things like that. It depends on the situation, but if I feel like they're meeting the requirements, I would still pass them, but I would give an
Mhm.
opportunity for improvement to do an image.
I really appreciate how careful you are in understanding what the minimum bar is and not declaring you need to be way above it, right?
Mhm.
It's refreshing to talk to an assessor who, says, look, the assessment objectives say this, I can't expect more than what it says, in the assessor guide. We have to read what it says literally and just go by that, and not more than it. So for the baseline configuration, how did you do hardware, software, firmware, and documentation?
So for hardware, we've established, we buy from Dell. These are the models that we buy, or we buy, whatever our firewall model is, switch model. We state, this is our, what we purchase and what we will add to our system, and then you know follow that. We update that as new models come out. For software, and firmware. It's really just a the version we look at and say, yeah, this is secure. This is a version we want to be on. Or, if a new version, eventually we have to go to Windows 11, so we will review that, and that will go through a complete process before we add that as a potential baseline. Firmware, similar. Usually we try to update, stay on the latest version of those that's tested and secured. Documentation, that's again, best practices, what we will read articles on, how should we apply this. We will talk about, we have applied this this setting because it will provide these security capabilities that would not exist otherwise. Things like that. Split, disabling split tunneling on VPN devices. How we do that. And if you're in the Microsoft cloud, there's MDM and there's MAM. So we would review which ones, what made sense for our mobile device management, and we would document that this is what we use for these to manage these devices. So it's really more of a just a formal statement of how we're applying that.
Awesome. Great information. So any last thoughts on this topic?
Can't think of any.
Okay. Well, I very much appreciate your time, Steve, and sharing SENTAR's experience and what was successful for them. It's always good to hear about what worked, right? What was acceptable to the DoD, so that we at least have a starting place, and then we can get wild with our solutions if we need to. But at least there's some precedent there.
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.